to Cabinet on the 23rd of November 2021. The first item is attendance. The second item is apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies to note today?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Thanks, Rachel. That brings us on to declarations of interest. Justine, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Leader. I'd like to draw your attention to agenda item number 6, so council tax. If you have a property that falls within classes A, B or C, in paragraphs 3.6 onwards, then you will have a personal interest. Councillor Clark, I believe you do. Do you wish to declare an interest?
Yes, please. It's
Thank
a
you.
personal interest having 2 other properties.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. In relation to agenda item number 10, it's about libraries. If anyone with whom you live or anyone with whom you have a close personal association works in any of the libraries affected, then you could possibly have a prejudicial interest. I'm unaware that this is the position for any member, but if it is, please declare now. Thank you. In relation to agenda item number 11, this is the item about public spaces protection order. If you're associated with any one of the bodies that have been consulted as set out in Appendix 2 and 3, then you may have a personal interest. Members, I do not know exactly what outside bodies you're on, but I am aware that Councillor Gordon is Community Councillor. Councillor Gordon, do you wish to declare a personal interest?
Yes, please, as a member of Rutland Community Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Clark, I'm aware that you're a Community Councillor. Do you wish to declare a personal interest?
Yes, please. Same councillor as Councillor Gordon.
Thank you. Members, are there any other interests in this item?
As a board member of Torbine Leisure Trust, as a trustee, I'm a council-appointed trustee, so I believe that's a personal interest only.
That's correct, and that's in relation to agenda item number 12. Thank you very much, Leader. Councillor Crofts, I also believe that you're a trustee of the Leisure Trust. Do you wish to declare an interest?
Yeah, as an appointed member by the council.
Thank you very much. And so lastly, are there any other declarations of interest? No? Well then, thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you for taking us through that, Justine. That's great. If we then move on to agenda item 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the 12th of October. Is everyone happy to approve those as a true and accurate record? Yep. Any matters arising from those? I don't believe so on the screen. So that moves us then on to updates on actions. Chief Executive, any updates to note on the actions there? No, if not, we move on to agenda item 6 then, which is the Council Tax Base 22-23 report. And if I hand over initially to Kelly on this.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll be brief. This is an annual report which we are required by legislation to bring to Cabinet each year that seeks our approval of the tax base 22-23 financial. Just to the Cabinet. If you recall, last year the assumed collection rate was reduced by 1% to reflect the challenges posed by COVID. Given the ongoing crisis and the fact that it is the Council, not any of the other precepting organisations, who bears any loss on collection, it would seem prudent to keep that assumed collection rate at 98% again this year. Also, there will be no change in terms of discounts, and the same discounts as last year will apply in the 22-23 financial year. Finally, I think it's important to remind anyone who may be struggling financially with council tax or with anything else that you can contact the council's revenue and benefits team, where there's lots of advice and support needed if you require that. So I'll keep that brief and hand over to Nigel now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Yeah, as the executive member says, the standard report, I bring it every year. We have to assess the tax base at the 31st of October, so the report lays that out. We've got an increase of 125 properties. We have to do them at average band D. As Kelly said, we've kept all the discounts the same. The only thing I just bring to Cabinet's attention, over and above what the executive member said, is that a number of community councils are seeing a slight reduction in their bandy equivalents, although the overall has gone up, and that's largely down to exemptions. And in the main, we're seeing around the delays in probate. But there's nothing we can do about that. So we'll have 125 more properties to add to our tax base. And as members know, obviously we have to await the settlement to know, how that affects our settlement, because the settlement adjusts for increases in council tax, but relative to Wales. So if our increase is lower than the average in Wales, we'll get more. If it's the other way around, it'll be different. But other than that, nothing further to add, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions on this report, colleagues? Okay, if we move then to the recommendations, is everyone happy to approve those recommendations? I believe that's carried. Anyone against? No? Okay, that's carried then. If we move then to agenda item 7, which is the financial monitoring 21-22 and the revenue budget update for 22-23, and over to Kelly initially.
Thanks again. The purpose of this report is to update Cabinet on the latest revenue budget forecast for 21-22, our initial estimate position for 22-23, and next steps for the 22-23 budget setting process. In terms of the latest financial monitoring position for the 21-22 budget, Cabinet will see from the table and detail in the report that there is an improved position since our last report back in September. This does of course assume that any additional exceptional costs and lost income as a result of COVID will continue to be funded via the Welsh Government Emergency Hardship Fund. I think at this point it's fair to say that the positive relationship and partnership approach between local and Welsh Government continues to aid us as a council as we move forward with recovering from the pandemic. Looking ahead now to the 22-23 budget, you'll recall from the medium-term financial plan that was agreed by Council in March that we were initially looking at a gap of just under 7 million. In September, we reported to Cabinet a revised gap of just over 4.2 million, and I'm pleased to say that following a lot of work by finance and chief officers and further analysis, we are now looking at, based on the assumptions contained within the report, a gap of around 1.5 million. Clearly, it's still a gap that we have to plug, but it's markedly better than what we started with. I want to thank our finance and chief officers for their ongoing work here. It really has made a difference and has allowed us to really start considering how this budget may look at an early stage. Scrutiny considered the estimate position at its November meeting, and I'm grateful for them for their feedback. In moving forward and building our budget, it's now a case of working through the detail further and considering any mitigations that are to be proposed by different service areas, alongside our provisional settlement from Welsh Government, which we'll receive on the 21st of December. The timetable and next steps are laid out in section 7 of this report. As I mentioned, we will get our settlement detail on the 21st of December, and then, of course, following Cabinet's consideration in early January, scrutiny will look at the proposed mitigations and budget at its January meeting, and we can then consider their feedback before we move into March's Budget Council. Again, I want to thank all involved for their ongoing work and thank our finance officers for their continued prudent approach. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Member. Yes, just quickly cantering through the report. The first part of the report is, as the Executive Member says, reports our latest monitoring position as at the end of September. Yes, it's a favourable variance, and for the first time since I can recall, social care and housing are underspending at this point in the year. But actually, they're underspending because of largely the issues that are well documented now within the social care sector. So although we're underspending, I think that position masks the real problems that social care is facing all across Wales, and which we've discussed and brought to the attention, and work with the Welsh Government to try and find a sustainable solution for it. The only other thing I'd bring out in relation to the monitoring is the reference to pay. Obviously, our budget was built on 2.75. The most recent assumption to be in line with the teachers was 1.75, but we've held that all within the budget. But obviously pay is subject to national negotiations and obviously discussions with trade unions. So that, that remains, a risk within the monitoring. The next part of the report then brings members up to date on where we are at this point in the budget process. And the executive member has indicated where we've got to. We're sitting on a gap of 1.5 million at the moment, and the table in 5.4 shows where that is. But I'll just quickly sort of talk about some of the assumptions and then some of the risks. We're budgeting for pay at 2%. We budgeted for the increased national insurance and pensions and all that normal inflationary stuff. We're building demand based on current levels, and external specific grant assumed to be at the same level, unless we know. And we haven't included anything yet in relation to the Welsh Government COVID initiatives, other than we assume that if they are going to continue, they will be funded by Welsh Government. So there's a section there in 5.6 towards the bottom that actually shows what the budget effectively buys at this moment in time. If we concluded it now, and members can read that, and I don't think that's a bad set of starting points for the budget. Things such as additional domiciliary care hours, uplifts in relation to social care and schools, all that kind of stuff. There is a section on risks. Obviously, we revised the medium-term financial plan up to 3.8%. I think following the CSR, I'm less worried about that now. And I think to model on an equivalent to last year seems prudent at this moment in time, and we hope for it to be better. We've built the estimates based on steady state. So in other words, not unless we really know, and not building any COVID impacts. So I've mentioned already there's several directly funded Welsh Government initiatives around homelessness, free school meals, track and trace, etc., etc. And we're assuming they're going to continue to be funded by Welsh Government. Hypothecated funding based on available information currently available. In relation to the Integrated Care Fund, there are changes in the way that fund is now going to be delivered at a national level. But in Gwent, we don't believe there'll be any significant impacts for 22-23. But over the 5 years of the new funding agreement, there will be. But there does seem to be a much more coordinated approach in Gwent with the Health Board as well, to sort of manage that and bring some pragmatism to that. I've mentioned pay. We based it on 2%, and obviously that could change. And the last point I make is about social care and the impact in terms of demand and staffing capacity. And I think I don't think I'm saying anything that's not blindingly obvious. I think social care will be a major feature of both the settlement announcement from Welsh Government and the budgets going forward for the next 2 or 3 years. And then the final part is the next the next steps, which are known by members. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Any questions there? David Daniels.
It's not a question, it's just to make a point. Nigel's already sort of touched on it in adult social care, the underspend, and I think it's worth highlighting that should we commission the dom care that we need, it would be around £370,000 from that favourable underspend. So, it's very much out of the social care crisis that figure is an underspend. And just to make the point that I am, in other sort of circles, I am making the point to Welsh Government that we need urgent support from them on this matter. So, just to make that point, really.
Thanks. It's well made, and thanks also for the part that you've played in lobbying for for a fair funding settlement that takes into account the pressures that social care are under. Obviously, that's a continuing process, both with Welsh Government and with UK Government to lobby to make sure that public services have the money that they need to help us recover and rebuild post-COVID. Any other questions, colleagues, before we move to the recommendations? Okay, the recommendations are at paragraph 10. 10.1, it's recommended that Cabinet notes the current financial forecasts for 2021-22. Secondly, the current 2022-23 estimate position and the proposed next steps are noted. And thirdly, that the timetable for the remainder of the 22-23 budget cycle is noted. Is everyone in favour of that? Anyone against or any abstentions? No, that's carried unanimously then. So on to item number 8 and the COVID recovery fund. Let me just papers on that. Okay. Right. Who wants to start presenting this report then? Rachel?
Thanks, leader. Yeah, really pleased to present this report to Cabinet this morning. As Cabinet are aware, at close of accounts, a 1.2 million reserve was created, which was specifically set up to target some of the worst impacts of COVID on our Torfaen communities. Now, as of yet, you know, that full impact has not been realised and will take many, many years. But through sort of like an assessment of looking at equality and also from views from our residents in terms of where they've benefited from using the community, what they were seeing out in the community. You know, leadership team working alongside Cabinet then came up with a series of projects to enable these to be funded, and these are fully outlined in project proposals in Appendix 2. They're a broad range, ranging from some public realm in terms of supporting the Canal and supporting our community and our very active and valued Canal volunteers to sort of like work with them and to give our new Canal coordinator a bit of a fighting fund to start doing some more works or undertaking commissions. We've been working really closely with the Friends of Pontypool Park for the reopening of the Folly and the Grotto. They need some capital works to bring them up to a standard in which they can be safely opened. We're also looking at putting in business grants. Now, there has been funding coming out for businesses from Welsh Government due to the impact of COVID. This is very much aimed at new starts or those looking to do IT improvements and to support their growth as they mature and as they emerge from the pandemic. Also proposals for youth counselling, again recognising the impact on young people. And to give extra support to that already there, and also in terms of then building our capacity as a community in terms of putting in place a framework for mental health first aid training. Also proposing that we look at the feasibility of a 3 or 4G pitch up in Abersychan, again trying to increase the accessibility to 3G and 4G in our communities and increase play in those areas. It's also the financial inclusion piece, which has been discussed previously, and the large proposal is for a series of town centre enhancements, particularly in Blaenavon and Pontypool, where we'll be looking at paving and paving the railings, looking at bringing in some parklets, and working very much with our businesses, our partnership groups and the town councils to put in a series of interventions which will clean and also green our town centres. And this is part of the first stage, in particularly for Pontypool, of town centre regeneration, which will be linked further with our emerging place plans and hopefully a bid into the Levelling Up Fund. And finally, based on our sufficiency audit, proposing to improve and have proper inclusive play spaces in Cwmbran and Pontypool Park as well. In terms of the framework, this is an ambitious programme for delivery. The proposals do give a high-level timeline. At leadership team tomorrow, Mark and I will be taking forward the framework for how this is going to be managed as a programme with key risks identified. You know, there are some where delivery will not be until next summer just because of design and commissioning and contracting. But, you know, there will be some which will be able to be done sooner rather than later. So commend the report to Cabinet, and we look forward to giving regular reports on the impact of each of these interventions.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for your work on this. I would like to start by thanking officers for their hard work in working with us on this. I know when Cabinet comes up with these demands, it does place extra burden on officers on top of the already busy day jobs, but we thought it was very important to put this money towards key projects to help the borough recover and rebuild. We have to remember, of course, this is one-off money, so we can't use it to, as much as we may want to resolve ongoing revenue pressures or recurring spend issues. But we were very keen, as paragraph 3.3 in the report says, to look at the impacts of the pandemic, both in terms of the direct impacts and the indirect impacts, the impact on health, the impact on communities, and the social side of it, and the economic impact too. And a number of member discussions to try and highlight some key interventions, I think have borne fruit with this fund. Some of the projects sort of fall into issues around the natural environment and our wish to improve our natural environment to help people getting out and about. One of the things from the pandemic that people have found is they've rediscovered part of their local areas when they couldn't perhaps travel further afield, and they're enjoying the outside spaces that we have in Torvine. So I think it's right that we invest in that natural environment. The Canal is a good example of that, as are places like the Folly and the Grotto. So that's sort of about the natural environment. There's a focus as well on physical activity and the benefits that can bring in terms of the health resilience that physical activity can bring. The 3 and 4G feasibility study, I hope can help to get towards closing a gap that we have in the north of the borough around provision in that way. Mental health, I think, has been something that's been brought into sharp focus by the pandemic and that impact. The money for the mental health first aid and for the youth counselling, especially given the disproportionate impact on younger people during the pandemic. I'm always thinking back about the last 18 months and wondering what I would have thought about those last 18 months if I was still in my youth, because 18 months then is a lot longer. It feels a lot longer than 18 months does when you're in your 40s, like I unfortunately am now. So I think that's very important that we look what we can do working in partnership to help our young people after what's been a very difficult time. I think the inclusive play equipment is great news for some children with disabilities and other challenges. If we can develop those 2 inclusive play areas, then it will really help all our children to enjoy outdoor spaces as well. You talked as well about the economic impacts and our wish to tackle inequality coming out of the pandemic. We talked before about our discretionary housing payments funds and the work we've done to try and ensure that there's more money to go to some of the hardest hit families in the borough. So the money for financial inclusion is very welcome, and the money for business grants is welcome too. I know we can't do everything we'd like to do to help local businesses. I'm sure Joe will say more, but I think it's right that we do what we can, because they've had a difficult time because of the pandemic. So I would like to thank members and officers for their work and their ideas. As ever, when you have a fund to spend an amount of money, it's very easy to spend that amount of money 10 times over. It's much harder to try and distill it down and to prioritise into things that will make the impact that we want. But I'm looking forward to these things. A special, personal thanks for the Canal Community Development Fund. I think that's something that will help our new Canal officer really get started. Obviously, £30,000 won't do everything we want to do to the canal. I think £30 million wouldn't get there, but it will give her a fund to start with some smaller projects and hopefully to get out there and looking what the other opportunities are to get in funding for our canal. That's a facility that I think so many local people have found to be a real godsend during the pandemic. It's enabled them to get out and about and to enjoy the natural environment. As I see walking along the canal towpath, that's often full of people walking, running, walking their dogs, spending a bit of time in that environment. So that's really, really welcome. But thank you for your hard work in this and to all officers who've contributed. I've got Joe to come in and then Fiona.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I just wanted to say that I more than welcome this report. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's providing the tools for a COVID recovery. I won't add to what Anthony said about business grants and economy and regeneration. That's all really important, but I wanted to talk about a part that I get quite excited about because of my previous life experiences. So when we initially started talking about the recovery fund, I suggested that we looked at installing one piece of inclusive play equipment in one of our or two of our bigger parks. But I'm so happy, I'm really excited that plans have gone much further. We're now looking at approving 2 inclusive play parks across Torvine, and I'm sure parents of little ones with learning disabilities will welcome this. They've got not one but 2 opportunities to visit local parks where their children's needs can be met, and they can enjoy a real, rich, family inclusive experience, and I think that's really important for our residents. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Well said. I look forward to visiting those and to see the young people there, having a fun time, which should be a right and an expectation of any child, no matter what difficulties they have to encounter in their lives. It should be a really positive development. Thanks, Fiona.
I just wanted to say something very similar, to be fair. Very, very pleased to see the youth support, particularly around counselling, but indeed the inclusive play, which is something that I think we could always try and improve and grow on. But the fact that our 2 main play parks are being considered for this kind of improvement is pretty impressive and fantastic. But I won't labour on it any further, as it has been covered by both the leader and Joe.
Okay, everyone else happy? Any more questions on the reports? Are we happy then to, he says scrolling down, to move to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 8.1 and 8.2. It's recommended that Cabinet agree the £1.2 million COVID recovery fund to be allocated to the project proposed in paragraph 4.3. And it's also recommended that the project be managed as a programme and that any under or overspend on individual projects can be managed as necessary to implement the programme as a whole and to ensure the maximum of outputs and outcomes for the communities of Torvine. Are we all happy to agree that recommendation? Any votes against? No. Any abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. If we move then to item number 9 on employability, and if I can bring in Joe Gordon.
Okay, thank you. So local authorities across the Cardiff Capital region have successfully delivered employability projects supporting tens of thousands of residents in employment, better employment. We've supported residents into further learning, and we've supported our young NEET residents. The 2019 Cardiff Capital Region Employment and Skills Plan highlights the value and importance that employers place on employability and the key role that this plays in helping residents into jobs of the future. In light of the recovery from the COVID pandemic, this is more important than ever. Led by all 10 local authorities in the Cardiff Capital Region have come together and prepared a framework for the future of employability in the region. This takes the lessons learned from the EU-funded programmes and sets out some key principles which should be considered when any replacement scheme is designed. The Regional Skills Partnership and Regional Business Council have both approved this framework to guide how employment activities are delivered in the future as the European social funding ends in 2022. It is important to note that at this stage, this is not a funding bid. It's not clear how the UK government's replacement fund for EU programmes, the Shared Prosperity Fund, will support employability activity, or whether this will continue to be separated into objective-led projects. However, all 10 local authorities were successful in receiving pilot funding for this financial year from the UK Government Community Renewal Fund to test this new approach. Further work will now be undertaken to co-produce the detail of a shared approach, a series of workshops led by LA Employability Lead and inviting NEET leads and other employability partners from the Regional Skills Partnership. Officers may then commence preparations for a regional submission to the UK Government Shared Prosperity Fund once we know the details. Prior to submission, any application will be presented to the Regional Skills Partnership, Regional Business Council and the Office for the City Deal for consideration. So today, Cabinet are asked to approve both the principle of a locally delivered, regionally coordinated approach to the employability post-EU and the proposed framework for future employability in the Cardiff Capital Region. I'll hand over to Dave Leach, Head of Economy and Skills, to provide some more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. If I just took members briefly then through what it is that we look to achieve with our employability programmes. So for us, employability is really about targeting the individual, but it's about the impact that that has on families, on communities, on employers and on the economy too. So from an employer's perspective, having staff with the right skills and knowledge and attitude means that they can hit the ground running and can introduce new thinking on products and processes. But from a community perspective, it means that we're able to get more people into employment, but not just into employment, into better employment. We're able to get some of our young people into employment, and we're able to help people further develop their learning. So it's a really important part of the suite of programmes that we offer. And traditionally, our employability offer has largely been funded through the EU, through EU programmes. And over the last 2 decades, they've delivered tens of thousands of employment outcomes for our residents across the region. And it's an activity that we really have tried to coordinate on a regional level. So the local authorities are delivering the activity, but the coordination is taking place on a regional level. Now, in the past, this has very much been sub-regional. It's been broken down because of the nature of EU funding into West Wales and the Valleys, which is ourselves, Bridgend, Caerphilly, Merthyr, RCT and Blaenau Gwent, and East Wales, which is Cardiff, Monmouthshire, Newport and the Vale of Glamorgan. So that's meant 2 slightly separate regional programmes have developed, regional projects have developed. So the proposal that's in front of Cabinet today is the result of a good few months' worth of work by all 10 local authorities across the Cardiff Capital Region to pull together a framework for what employability should look like in the region that works for the region, that works specifically for the Cardiff Capital Region. And this builds on the recommendations from the Regional Skills Partnership, from the Employment and Skills Plan that the City Deal has put forward, in which employability features very strongly. So if I very quickly talk you through the proposed framework that's in place, this is based on some shared principles, some lessons, if you like, that we've learned from over 20 years of employability programmes. And that's that we know that local authority delivered projects work, that delivering at the level closest to the citizen works very effectively for local authorities. We know that the brand is well represented and well trusted by our local communities. We know that preventative activity is a really important way of getting people into long-term job outcomes rather than moving in and out of the employment market. We know that continuity of provision is important, and not only important, very cost effective if we're able to maintain that level of provision that we've got. And also we know that the programmes have made decades of progress towards real change. When we started in the beginning of these EU-funded employability programmes, qualification levels were low and employment was high, and those employability teams have made a real difference to that. So off the back of that, collectively as 10 local authorities, we've designed this framework around some common tools and approaches, and those are set out for members in the appendix as part of that broad framework. And they cover things like how we recruit and engage our participants to join employability programmes, how we allocate caseworkers to make sure that we're getting the right person the right support that they need, how we work with our local residents to be able to assess the individual barriers that they have and help to overcome them, and that broad menu of support and intervention then that we can draw in and put in place. So the framework, as Councillor Gordon has mentioned, has been through the Regional Skills Partnership, through the Regional Business Council, and has received endorsement from those bodies. And it's now at the point where we're asking each individual local authority if this framework is something that we're able to sign up to deliver. There are some risks around the broad employability framework in the region. As Councillor Gordon mentioned, this isn't at this stage a funding bid. We still don't yet have clarity on what the successor programme to the EU funds will look like and whether this will be a priority within that. So we've prepared a framework in anticipation of being able to build a bid for that programme when it comes out. Another risk to point out is that there is other activity taking place within the local areas, some of which is delivered nationally. But to mitigate that, officers have started discussion with other employability agencies operating in the region. So we're speaking to Welsh Government, we're speaking to DWP, we're speaking to Working Wales and the third sector. And they're all supportive of the concept set out in the framework for future employability that is presented within this report. So they're all keen to work with local authorities on the detail, which we hope will then allow us to minimise, not completely remove, but minimise competition between participants on different programmes. So off the back of that, if the decision is taken today, what will then happen is the preparation of a funding bid, basically based on those principles that are set out in the framework. And there's a request of all 10 local authorities to consider this at some level within their cabinet structures over the next 2 months.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Joe, for your work on this. I would guess that given the lack of clarity and detail on the post-EU, the ESF funding in key areas like this, being prepared as a region is going to be vital. But I guess our request would be for as much clarity as soon as possible on what that post-EU funding is going to look like, would it?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, any further questions, colleagues? Any other points people want to make? Okay, if we move then to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 9. 9.1, that Cabinet approve the principle of a locally delivered, regionally coordinated approach to employability post-EU, and that secondly, that Cabinet approve the proposed framework for future employability in the CCR as shown in Appendix B of the report. Are we all happy with that? Any objections? Anyone against? No, that's carried unanimously. Thank you, Dave, for your work on this, and thank you, Joe. On to item number 10, which is libraries, and over to Joe again.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so officers commissioned a detailed review of the library services back in 2018. Progress has been made in some areas. The service transformation within the strategy has been hindered by the COVID-19 pandemic. So during the pandemic, we had to change quickly to change the way that we deliver our services, and I'm pleased to say that we were the first library authority in Wales to introduce the request and collect service, and our libraries at home service has gone from strength to strength. But the pandemic has changed the way that our library users are accessing our services, and it's important right now to pause and reflect on that impact that this might have in the long term. So we're presented with an opportunity for us to accelerate the transformation proposed in the strategy, particularly around youth engagement, community enablement and health and wellbeing. But in the short term, we've still got 4 vacant library assistant roles within the service. Filling these roles right now while the service delivery models are being reviewed could prejudice the outcome of the review, and it could result in an unsuitable staffing structure for future delivery. So maintaining 4 vacant posts is leading to staff shortages, particularly on Saturday hours. And as footfall and book issues start to rise, the service is at severe risk of disruption if current opening hours are maintained. So to manage this, officers are therefore proposing a temporary reduction in opening hours on Saturdays across all 3 libraries, and on Tuesday mornings and Thursday afternoons at Pontypool Library, whilst the long-term staffing structure and operating hours are considered in detail. So this will enable the continuation of the libraries in all 3 locations. So Cabinet are asked to note the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the delivery of the library and information strategy and approve a temporary reduction in the opening hours to mitigate the risk of unplanned closures, whilst the potential for accelerating the implementation of the library strategy is considered. I'll hand over to Head of Economy and Skills, Dave Leach, who can take you through the report.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So, in terms of this report then, Councillor Gordon's mentioned that the library strategy was adopted back in 2018, and that set out a fundamental vision for what the library service should be looking to achieve, which was that fundamental to the service is a commitment to maximise the role of libraries as a focal point for both communities and for personal development, and that our libraries and information services will serve all sections of the community whilst concentrating resources to where they're most needed and where they can be most beneficial. And that includes then activities around engaging with disadvantaged communities, supporting children and older people, and supporting the most vulnerable in society. And we're reaching the midpoint now within that library strategy. And prior to COVID, so when the strategy was still relatively new, we were making some good initial progress in its delivery. So we've seen the co-location of services into Cumbrian Library. We've seen Citizens Advice Bureau moving in, Gateway Credit Union alongside the Council's customer care offer from the library as well. We've seen the incorporation of the Valleys Regional Park Discovery Gateway into the Blaenavon Shared Centre, which is the World Heritage Centre and Library. And we've seen a significant increase in customers accessing e-books. We've seen new partnerships emerging between the library service, the Integrated Wellbeing Network and Healthy Blaenavon. And we've been able to host activity to support other services around employability recruitment days, domiciliary care workers, around the introduction of our volunteer-led Read to Me activities. But with the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, we had to pull back from some of those activities that we're doing and pause essentially the long-term changes that the strategy envisaged, because we had to rapidly introduce some new services that were more reflective around the circumstances that we found ourselves in. So people not being able to physically enter those libraries at that point in time. A couple of years on now from that point, we're starting to understand, at least in the short term, the impact that the pandemic's having on the way that residents are engaging with our library services. And we are finding that book issues are starting to recover, but they're significantly below their pre-pandemic levels. We know that demand is continuing to grow for some of the services that we introduced or scaled up during the pandemic, like our Libraries at Home service, which delivers books out to people. And we're also seeing a sustained demand for more of our activity-based interventions, so particularly those that engage with young people, things like baby rhyme time, story and craft sessions. So whilst we continue to monitor those, it is an appropriate time, I think, for us to pause and reflect on ways that we can accelerate the wider transformation that was proposed in the strategy. So this means moving beyond that co-location, moving beyond just having services in the same space, to really hitting what the strategy said we should be doing, which is having libraries as the first point of access for citizens who want to engage with public service. Redesigning our health and wellbeing offer so that they're integrated into the delivery of population health outcomes rather than just focused on what the service can deliver on its own. And redesigning our learning programmes so that it becomes a delivery mechanism for the Council's ambition to support improved adult and youth employability rather than just a distinct libraries learning programme. And similarly, supporting that shift in ethos within the library service itself, which is starting to happen, which is encouraging us to become more community enablers, which will lead to a more vibrant programme of volunteer-led activity. And these are all areas that we need to invest time now in exploring and hopefully accelerating in light of the changes with the pandemic. But what that does mean, as Councillor Gordon pointed out, we're currently holding some posts vacant, library assistants posts vacant, which were vacated during the pandemic. And it would not be appropriate for us to permanently fill those roles while these service delivery models are under review. So we are proposing the reduction in hours to facilitate that review taking place, which gives us the opportunity then to monitor and assess the impact, partly that those services are now having, but also of the reduced hours on service provision, while that task and finish group considers ways to accelerate the strategy. Section 4.7 of the report lays out the proposed new opening hours. The Saturday will bring us into line with other local authorities. In terms of the weekday changes that we're proposing, these are two particular changes. There's a proposed reduction in opening hours on a Tuesday at Pontypool in the morning, and there's a proposed reduction in opening hours on a Thursday at Pontypool in the afternoon, with some minor half an hour changes on the other 2 days to bring it into line with the opening hours for the other libraries across the borough. So there are some risks that are set out within the appendix, particularly around the impacts that the service may have, the reductions in service may have. But what we've tried to do in designing up the opening hours there is to mitigate those impacts. So we've purposely tried to align where possible with school run times to maximise the opportunity for residents with children to still access the service. We've tried to maintain that core principle of having a service offer across all three of our libraries, so Cwmbran, Blaenavon and Pontypool. And we've tried to make sure that that full day provision is maintained in Pontypool on a Wednesday, aligned with Outdoor Market Day, which is when we know the highest levels of footfall are coming into town. So following the decision that's taken today, if the recommendations are approved, officers will then look to commence these task and finish groups to take forward the acceleration of the strategy, and we'll start a communications campaign to notify people around the temporary changes in hours, but the reasons for those changes, as I've talked through. And we'll commence a consultation with the libraries team in relation to any impacts that it may have on rotas and working patterns.
Thank you, David. Any questions, colleagues? Well, thank you for your work on this, David. I know we haven't made it easy for you because of our, our passion for the library service and the fact that we value it as a community asset. I look forward to sort of the wider discussions about strategy, hopefully in the future, about how we can make sure that libraries stay at the real heart of our community's offer as a council. I'd also like to thank library staff for their adaptive and flexible approach during the pandemic. The book loan service that they ran when people couldn't get out to go to libraries was I know was a real lifesaver for some people who were shielding or were having to self-isolate. So that's very welcome, and I welcome this pragmatic approach. I think it's the right thing to do to address this time whilst maintaining provision across the three library centres, which I know members really value, the three centres across the borough. Any more questions, colleagues, before we move to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 8.1. It's recommendation that Cabinet firstly notes the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the delivery of library information strategy, but also the opportunity this presents to accelerate the implementation of that strategy. Secondly, approves a temporary reduction in the opening hours on Saturday across all three libraries, and on Tuesday mornings and Thursday afternoons at Pontypool, as set out in paragraph 4.7, to mitigate the risk of unplanned closures, whilst the potential for accelerating the implementation of the library strategy is considered. Everyone happy to approve those recommendations? Any votes against? No, that's carried. So thank you, Joe, and thank you, Dave, for that. On to agenda item 11 then, dog controls. Coming, Mandy.
Thanks, Leader. This report relates to a review that has been undertaken on public spaces protection orders, known as PSPOs, which put in place rules for dog controls in the borough. The existing PSPOs create offences for failing to remove dog feces from any land in Torvine to which the public has access, allowing a dog to roam without a lead in specified areas, and allowing a dog to enter certain areas where dogs are excluded.
PSPOs provide a tool to enable the council to manage the antisocial effects caused by irresponsible dog owners and help keep the borough safe and clean. The law under which PSPOs are created requires that they are reviewed every 3 years. As the existing PSPOs for dog controls were introduced on the 1st of December 2018, they have become due for review. The report outlines the outcome of a 3-year review into whether PSPOs remain relevant and effective in maintaining a clean and green Torvine, one of the council's corporate priorities. The review comprised a public consultation. Members were also provided the opportunity to share their views at a seminar held virtually on November the 1st, as well as through the public consultation process. Members were fully supportive of the continuation of the PSPOs and thank them for their contribution, input and support. The consultation responses showed significant support for retaining PSPOs for dog controls, although some comments were received expressing concern about the effectiveness of enforcement. The feedback in relation to enforcement is being considered by the enforcement team, and as the report outlines, proposes this to be proposed to cleaner scrutiny next year as part of their basket for consideration. There are also some proposals for PSPOs that require dogs on lead and exclusions to apply to other areas. An assessment of the implications of applying PSPOs to the additional areas proposed is to be undertaken and the findings reported to me. The report also sets out the implications of extending, varying or not renewing PSPOs. The recommendation based on the review findings is to extend the PSPOs for a further 3 years. Dan Morelli is here today should there be any technical questions, but I commend the report to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandy. Dan, anything you want to add?
Thanks, Councillor Owen. The only thing that I would add to the information that's already been provided is that the review has been carried out in line with the law relating to PSPOs and also the supporting guidance. Despite there being some limitations on the in-person methods available to consult with the public due to the pandemic, there has been a good level of public participation in the consultation. We had 169 responses in total. The analysis of those responses is provided at Appendix 4. But in terms of headline findings, these are that 98% of respondents are in favour of retaining PSPOs relating to dog fouling, 84% are in favour of retaining those relating to dog exclusions, 90% are in favour of those relating to dogs on leads areas, and also the responses provided by the public have been invaluable in assisting this evaluation process. So we do thank all those who took the time to respond. The feedback will also be used, as outlined by Councillor Owen, to help inform the need for any service improvements, particularly in relation to enforcement. And finally, I would draw Cabinet's attention to one risk, whereby if a decision is taken to discharge PSPOs, there will be no offences created for failure to remove dog mess or for other dog controls referred to in the report. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for your work on this on top of an already busy year, I know that. Okay, any other questions, colleagues, on this report? If not, are we happy to move then to the recommendations at paragraph 8? It's recommended that, based on the findings of the public consultation, that Cabinet approves the extension of the existing PSPO to ensure service continuity, and that officers work on the additional areas proposed by members of the public during the consultation and produce a report for the executive member to consider on the impacts of increasing the number of PSPOs and consequential impact on the enforcement service. Are we all happy to agree that recommendation? Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Mandy. If we're okay then to move on to agenda item 12, which is the Torvine Leisure Trust energy project. And back to Mandy.
Thanks again, Leader. Okay, a project of work to reduce electricity consumption at the 5 Torvine Leisure Trust sites, which is Pontypool Active Living Centre, Cumbrae Stadium, Bowden Centre, Fairwater Leisure Centre and the Ski Centre, by approximately 40% has been identified between council officers, the Leisure Trust and the Welsh Government Energy Services. The work will include full fitting of LED lighting, both internally and externally, including flood lighting, the installation of solar panel systems, and some additional minor improvements to reduce electricity consumption. The project cost is estimated to be circa 770,000 and is estimated to save around 140,000 per year. Importantly, this will also help annual carbon emissions by around 200 tonnes of CO2. Despite efforts as a registered charity, the Leisure Trust has been unable to obtain any funding, grants or loans to secure finances for the project. As SALEX interest-free loans, which the Council have used for a number of energy projects, are only open to the public sector, the Leisure Trust are also unable to access this option. Therefore, we are seeking approval from Cabinet to secure a SALEX loan for the project to progress. The loan and repayments would be in the Council's name, with the Leisure Trust making formally agreed regular payments to the Council to cover the full costs without any financial loss to the Council. It is estimated that the full repayments, anticipated to be 140,000 per year, would be complete within 5.5 years. Julian, who has led on this project, has joined us today to answer any technical questions, and I'm also pleased to introduce to Cabinet our new Carbon Reduction Manager, Gren Ham. We're really pleased Gren joined us and welcome him to the authority. I'll just hand you over now to Rachel to cover off any other issues in the report. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Owen. Can I just draw members' attention basically to the table at paragraph 4.2. This just gives a more breakdown of the cost of activity at each site with the proposed energy saving and also importantly the CO2 saving. The report then further goes to outline that we did look at doing a combined project with heating. However, we are anticipating that further separate funding streams will be made available in due course through the Welsh Government Energy Service, which might be more grant-based than loans. And so there's a separate project currently being looked at in terms we can also modernise and decarbonise the heat systems within the Leisure Trust, which, as you can imagine, with their pools, requires a significant heat and electric load to keep them going. So in terms of the actual projects itself, I think it's important Cabinet also realised that as part of the agreement between the Council and TLT, the Council retains the responsibility for maintaining and replacing these assets in terms of the physical infrastructure of the buildings and the heating and the electrics. So it was actually within our interest as well, not just TLT's, to also have these replaced because they are coming almost to the end of their current life cycle. Obviously, clearly, this is huge in terms of us and TLT demonstrating our commitment to our climate change emergency, and also, improving the lighting will also ensure that TLT can give a good and reliable services, particularly for the floodlights on the externals. I think also, the report is joint between myself and Dermot because the report asks for that delegation given to Dermot as Chief Officer of Education and as the lead commissioner for TLT to agree the terms for the agreement for the repayment mechanism between TLT and the Council. It's been a really good project, a demonstration of partnership working and us working with TLT to secure this on their behalf. So thank you, Cabinet. The team are here for any technical questions in terms of any of the works that are going on.
Great, and thanks to the team. Thanks, Julian and Gren and Rachel and Dermot for your work on this, as well as Mandy. Fiona.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to say that I thought the report was really well written. I think it's very, for a layperson, as it states in one of the points that it actually brings up in 3.1, it demonstrates on that last sentence to put into layman's terms, the Council's usage would be 3,500 homes in the borough and TLT's usage would be 600 homes, which really, it gives a verbal picture of actually the amount of energy that TLT is using to regular people that won't necessarily know how all this works. So that language, I think, is brilliant in any reports, but I'm really pleased to see that because it makes it very accessible to everybody. And I'm just really pleased to see this report coming to light, and I can't wait for it to really, or hope it gets voted for it to be accepted and to come into fruition. And very much in line with the climate change emergency that we've called. I think this is the right thing to be doing, and I welcome it.
Great, thanks Fiona, agree entirely. Any other questions, colleagues, or points people want to make? Well, thank you, officers, for your work on this. Cutting costs and carbon emissions is something that I hope lots of public service partners are going to bring out plans for. So this is a welcome investment in that direction. If I can move Cabinet then to the recommendations at paragraph 8, that Cabinet approve that the Council secures the Salex loan on behalf of Torvine Leisure Trust to enable the project to progress, subject to Torvine County Borough Council entering into an agreement with Torvine Leisure Trust for the repayment of the loan, subject to terms to be agreed by the Chief Officer for Education. Is everyone in favour of that? Anyone against? No, that's carried unanimously. So thank you, officers, for your work on this, and look forward to this coming to fruition. If we can move then to agenda item number 13, the Code of Practice on Ethical Employment in Supply Chains, and hand over initially to Kelly.
Anthony. This report seeks Cabinet's approval for Council to sign up for the Welsh Government's Code of Practice on Ethical Employment in Supply Chains and asks that we vote the action plan laid out in Appendix 1. The Welsh Government quite rightly expects local authorities across Wales to sign up and adopt the policy. I'm sure you've all read the report and action plan and would agree that there isn't anything in here we would disagree with. The Code of Practice seeks to ensure that workers in public sector supply chains are employed ethically and in compliance with both the letter and spirit of UK and international laws. Shockingly, in this day and age, we have all read stories around unethical employment practices, including modern-day slavery. We all, I feel, have a duty to ensure that these type of practices cannot continue to take place in Wales. I think that the action plan ensures that we work towards meeting the 12 commitments of the code and isn't a policy or something that we just sign up to, but is a policy that is meaningful and delivers what it needs to. So I thank Jason and all our officers for their work on this. I'm sure we all agree it's a positive step. And I'll hand over, is it to Nigel now, just to go through the report?
Thank you, Kelly. I mean, there's not a lot. There's not a lot really to add. I mean, Welsh Government published the code and expect all public sector bodies, and particularly local authorities, to sign up to it. So that's the principal recommendation here. The Torvine will sign up to it. You'll see in the appendix that some of the commitments, you know, in the code.
Jesus Christ.
Sorry, Nigel, you on mute?
Sorry, Councillor. Oh.
Not as far as I know.
I think something just happened with the feed then from... Hello, can you hear us on the video? So I think the video link's gone down a second. Just a second, colleagues. Hello, colleague, can you hear us now on the link?
Yeah, it's just come back.
Okay.
Come back in.
I think we lost you for a second there. So hand back to Nigel then. Back up again.
Okay, I'll go. I'll start again. There's not a lot to add to what Kelly had said. All local authorities are expected to sign up to this code of practice. The majority have, and this report just allows us to sign up to that. The appendix is there. The code of practice commitments have been written, carefully within the code. There are a number where it says to consider, and there will be a number where there will be financial implications arising out of them, and that's why it's consider. And our actions are around about working towards those. But as the executive member says, this is something the authority would want to embrace, and we will work towards achieving the action plan. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, any questions, colleagues, before we move to recommendations? This certainly seems to me to be something that fits into our wider agenda to try and look at value for money in a wider sense than just lowest cost in what we procure as an organisation, looking at the environmental impact of our supply chains, the employment standards, and the elements of local spend and many other factors that we'd look at factoring in there as well. If I can take, colleagues, if we're happy then, to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 9. It's recommended that Cabinet firstly approves adopting the Code of Practice on Ethical Employment in Supply Chains, and secondly notes the action plan in Appendix 1. Are we all in favour? Right, that's passed unanimously. No one against. So thank you, Kelly and Nigel, for that. So on to agenda item 14, which is the Annual Complaints Report 2020-21, and over to David Joel initially.
I think you're on mute, Dave.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. Okay then, before you this morning is the Council's Annual Complaints Report, providing an overview of the complaints performance for the financial year 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. It also includes formal receipt of the Public Service Ombudsman's Wales Annual Letter. A critical part of dealing with and resolving complaints are lessons learned and actions taken as part of their resolution. There is a risk to the Council's reputation, of course, if residents or the Public Service Ombudsman perceive that complaints are not taken seriously or dealt with appropriately. Overall, the Council has performed very, very well, but like all matters relating to performance, COVID-19 has undoubtedly had an impact. During the 2021 financial year, there was a 10% reduction in complaints compared to previous years, with fewer complaints being upheld. Significantly, for the first time that year, compliments outstripped complaints. This was in significant measure down to the way in which frontline staff conducted themselves throughout the pandemic and will continue to do so. Through its preventative work, the Central Complaints Team continues to have a positive impact on complaints handling across the Council. The team often deal with concerns at the point of contact, focusing on liaison with service areas to resolve issues quickly, whilst identifying opportunities to learn from customer contact. This provides a consistent approach to the Council's complaints procedure. Detailed compliments, complaints, lessons learned for each of the service areas can be seen in detail in Appendix 1 of the report. The Public Service Ombudsman for Wales has started publishing quarterly statistics from April this year. The figures for the first quarter are included in Appendix 2 of the report. Benchmarking between local authorities is not straightforward because of differential working practices. We will, however, or at least the team will, look to this information in order to better understand our performance here in Torfaen. The annual letter from the PSO is attached to Appendix 3. It shows that the number of complaints reported by the public to the PSO about council services per 1,000 residents was 0.13. I think you'll all agree, a fantastic set of figures. This was, along with Neath Port Talbot, the lowest figure of the 22 local authorities in Wales, and that with no interventions. The report was recently presented to the Governance and Audit Committee as part of their new statutory role of ensuring the Council's complaints procedure is fit for purpose. The committee was asked to review and assess the authority's ability to handle complaints effectively and to make comments and recommendations. The committee's verdict was a clean bill of health for our procedures, and their conclusion being that complaints were being handled very effectively. Before I hand you over to Chris Corton, who is standing instead of what's her name? Karen. Yeah, Karen Davis, awfully sorry. I think it's worth mentioning that very often this particular team flies under the radar. Their work is rarely mentioned as a matter of course, but without them, I think we'd be in a bit of a pickle because they are a front line in terms of engaging with the public and dealing with complaints as they come in and damping down a lot of the excesses. I think they've done a fantastic job right throughout the pandemic, and as one of the figures, one of the statistics proves, for this year, and it's the first time ever, compliments on the way they handle complaints and deal with complaints, strict complaints themselves by a measurable margin. And all power to their elbow. Long may they continue. I commend the report, and I'll hand you over to Chris Corton, and he can fill in any gaps, any details, and I'm sure he's more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Councillor Yao. I think the majority of it is covered there. Give some more detail about numbers that we had for the past year. So as Councillor Yao mentioned, there was a decrease. We were down to 75 complaints for the year, which was down 10.71% on the previous financial year. It was very low in the first quarter, which was during the initial lockdown period, and then started to increase over the next quarters thereafter. Like Councillor Yao mentioned, the compliments received across the authority outnumbered the complaints of 106, up from 57 the previous year. I think that's testament to the hard work of the service area individuals and what they did, and that was noted by the residents throughout the authority last year. Numbers are going up this year, and that is a trend that's being experienced across authorities. So we are continuing to meet and hold our regular briefings with teams, service areas, to discuss trends that we're receiving, particularly with regards to communication, so that we can manage expectations, because we know that services are still impacted at the moment. So we did have some virtual training last year as well, given by the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. They've said they'll be willing to hold more training sessions this year. We're just waiting on details of that, and then we'll start inviting service areas to attend those. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Karen, as well, as she's watching for her work on this. I know it's very much appreciated by members. Any questions, colleagues? I think Councillor Yole's entirely right. This is something that sometimes goes under the radar, but the hard work they do in dealing with the complaints that come in is very much welcomed by us as members. If we're okay then to move to the recommendations, if there's no one else wanting to come in, the recommendations are at paragraph 8.1. Cabinet are invited to note the information presented in this report and agree to continue to support the central complaints and FOI team. Is everyone content with that recommendation? Voting for? Anyone against? No, that's passed unanimously. Thank you, Chris, and please pass our thanks to Karen as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, if we move on then to item number 15, which is the Homeless Hostel Support Service Contract Award, and hand over initially to Dave Daniels.
Thank you, Leader. It's quite a straightforward report in that it's a tendering report, but it's worth elaborating on. It's part of a requirement from Welsh Government for us local authorities across Wales to develop a phase 2 homeless plan, and this is a core part of that, because this is providing more intensive support and accommodation for individuals who are rough sleeping or homeless or at risk of. It'll deliver intensive support for those on site in accommodation, semi and fully supported accommodation. It's part of this is featured in the report is the conversion of Hales House into a more generic homeless support project, and this is what this service will run. it's much needed in my opinion, because I think for a long time we've needed more intensive support for rough sleepers, particularly long-term rough sleepers, and preventing the proliferation of long-term rough sleeping, because as we know, the earlier that you get in and provide that intensive support, the more likely that you are to prevent that more resource intensive and life damaging long-term rough sleeping. It's a positive move, and I'll be updating members as it develops, because it's a good development from my perspective. So it's quite straightforward, but I want to elaborate on what was behind it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Daniels. Anyone else want to speak on this report? Jill?
Come in, Chair. It's just to reiterate what Dave was saying. Obviously, as part of our procurement requirements that we do regularly get back out to tender to ensure that we are getting value for money. As we also work with Children's Services in this instance to kind of reconfigure that contract, and as David said, to make it more flexible, so that we've kind of removed the age restrictions. However, Hales House is quite a flexible building, so we can zone that building off. And I would just kind of confirm what David has said, really, that the importance of the use of that building and that service, and that we accommodated 42 people in Hales House over the last 12 months. So it is a service that's well used and well regarded.
Thank you both. Obviously, the demand is one that always outstrips supply with housing. We're going to talk about that maybe in agenda item 17 later, but I'm pleased to see that at 4.3 this is 80% quality, provided we're not just going for a cheap option, we're trying to go for the best option for those service users. Any questions, colleagues? Are we okay then to move on to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 8.1. It's recommended that the contract for the provision of generic homeless hospital service provision is awarded to provider 1 following the outcome of a tender process. Are we all in favour of that? Any votes against? No, that's passed. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Dave, for your work on that. On to agenda item 16 then, which is the VAWDASV Support Service Contract Award.
I'll take this one. Again, it's quite a straightforward tendering process. So it's a straightforward report in a way, really. As it's self-explanatory report that it provides housing-related support for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, who we know from experience are particularly vulnerable to housing-related situations, really. So there's a particular need there. As much of the housing support grant is led by client demand and client needs, this is basically fulfilling that. It's a crucial service, as I'm sure is obvious from the report, to be honest. And as you've mentioned, I'm really pleased that once again, as with the previous report, we're placing particular emphasis on quality over cost, because with this service in particular, you can't scrimp on these things. So yeah, it's very straightforward. Happy to take any queries.
Thanks, David. Any questions, colleagues? Again, I agree that emphasis on quality with this is important, especially as it's dealing, as you say, with a very vulnerable group of service users. And again, this is a bit of work that the council does, that working with the contractor that necessarily is very confidential and goes under the radar, but it doesn't make it any less vital for the lives of people that are helped in this way. Any questions, colleagues? Are we okay to move then to the recommendation, which is again at paragraph 8.1. It's recommended that the contract for the provision of VAWDASV support service provision is awarded to provider 1 following the outcome of a tender process. Is everyone in favour? Okay, that's carried unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. So we move on to agenda item 17, which is the Home Seeker Policy Review, and I'll hand back to David Daniels.
Yeah, slightly less straightforward and probably a bit more lengthy, so sorry to cap the meeting off like this, but it's our home seeker policy. So these are a set of changes ranging from fairly minor to maybe slightly moderate, to basically make the system make a bit more sense for clients. Before I sort of launch into what those changes are, I think, yeah, it's, as referenced previously in the meeting, that is worth highlighting the significant difficulties that we're facing, and our staff in particular are facing at the moment in housing and homelessness. In that, I think we've very nearly touched on 3,000 people on the housing waiting list, which is the highest I've ever known it to be. And it just goes to show the tremendous challenges that we're facing in housing and homelessness. Homelessness in particular, we've noticed a particular trend around single male individuals over the past year. I think the statistics showed that it was largely around relationship breakdown. I think so. That's the pandemic taking an additional toll that may not have considered. So the challenges that we're facing can't be understated, and I think we're doing everything we can, including reviewing the home seeker system to try and prioritise those who need moving urgently or more urgently as possible. So some of the changes are fairly minor and maybe moderate in nature. So I'll go through them just so everyone's clear on them. So it includes removal of platinum and homeless band, and then being incorporated into the gold band. So we'll have gold, silver and bronze. Both of those, the clients who fit those bands will not lose any priority at all, so they'll have exactly the same priority they had before. The rationale for removing platinum is that it's just not used to the degree that it used to be, because it was originally set up for the bedroom tax, which is still very much in play, but we've managed relocations and downsizing to avoid having to pay the bedroom tax quite well over the past several years. So it's just not needed, because I think there's all of 2 people on the list at the moment. The homeless band is slightly different rationale. It at present houses are identified as homeless, and that therefore identifies the house as homeless and the individuals going into the house as homeless. So there's a potential there for stigma. So it's good practice to try and anonymise the families that are going to use these properties, to give them a chance of succeeding in the communities that they're placed into. As I say, it does instinctively sound difficult, but the priority will remain exactly the same. The next subsection is property entitlement, and this allows families and households that have intermittent household members. So, for example, if you have a live-in carer every now and then, or if you have a household that is divorced or separated, and child access is intermittent in the week, so maybe it's 2 or 3 nights a week. This allows households who have the ability to pay for the extra room to bid for slightly bigger properties than they ordinarily would be able to. So under present circumstances, maybe a single parent may not be able to bid on a 2-bed property because of the bedroom tax. They will now be able to do so, because if they can afford to do so, and that will make life a lot easier for separated or divorced families, or those with live-in carers from time to time. So it's a positive move. Eligibility is the third subsection, so it's relatively minor. We presently, people who bid on a property and are successful, they can't then bid on another property within the next 12 months. We're changing it so that they can't re-register on the system for 12 months as well, because we were finding that it was creating unnecessary admin for staff, especially at a time when they're so hard pressed as it is. So it's fairly minor, really, because people can currently re-register immediately, but they can't bid anyway for the next 12 months. So we're just removing that. There is a current and former debts subsection, so that is basically giving us a more consistent and fair process for those who come with tenants who come with existing debt. Basically, we found there were differentials across different RSLs. So some were expecting a certain percentage of debt to be repaid and a certain number of weeks of repayment or months of repayment, and others were having completely different. This gives a more consistent set of circumstances for all RSLs to fulfil, for those tenants to be able to bid on other properties. And that's outlined in the document itself, which is attached to this one. We've got so exceptions policy. So there is that sounds rather broad, but it refers mainly to the ability to basically take a certain percentage of units off the system that won't go out to advert, which will enable us to have some resilience in the system. If we have, and flexibility as well, if you have individuals or families who are in urgent need of rehoming for whatever reason, whether that be like a house fire or whatnot, and it gives a certain level of transparency too, which we don't presently have, because the decision will have to be taken by the complex case panel, which will mean that it has to go through multiple people as opposed to one officer. So I personally welcome that, because it strengthens the transparency of the system, which is occasionally challenged from time to time. So largely the changes are sort of moderate to mild, really, but and I understand that there's probably a more substantial review of the system, but for the moment, these are just common sense changes.
Thank you, David. Jill, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think David's done a good job of highlighting what the differences are in the policy. Just to confirm that, yes, we currently have 2,990 people on the register. So, as was already highlighted, almost hitting 3,000 with significant challenges in the system. The team have worked with the RSLs over the last 12 months, really, and tenants to get feedback and to get feedback from people that are on the register. And part of these changes are in response to that feedback, in that some of the confusion and some of the bureaucracy, really, that hopefully the new policy will streamline. I just want to pick up on the 4.7 about eligibility to register, and just to confirm, really, and to reassure members that if there are exceptional circumstances, obviously we will take that into account, because if people have significant medical change or health condition materialises after they've been allocated, then yes, we will also always take those into consideration. And I think the point being that that direct kind of matching with through the complex panel, I think, is a real positive move. In that, again, the feedback was that maybe that we weren't always bringing together the right professionals to understand that person. And then to be able to allocate in exceptional circumstances. So that complex care panel basically brings together anybody who's aware of the situation of that prospective tenant, so that we can ensure that they are allocated on a priority level. And I think that was probably a little bit that was missing previously. And I'm happy to take any questions that members have.
Thanks, Jill, and I think we'd say thank you to Simon for his work on this issue as well. And I'd just like to pay tribute to Dave for his passion and drive on this issue as the cabinet member. He's someone who really cares about the issue of housing and about how we try and resolve some of the issues that have been outlined today. Really, this isn't just a system issue, is it? It's a case of huge demand. You mentioned 3,000. Nearly people on the waiting list. There's a human story behind each and every one of those 3,000 people. I think sometimes people don't understand, and there is a limited supply. So I guess we can, every bit of work we can do to help improve that supply of genuinely affordable social rented properties is a should be a big priority of ours, because in the absence of that, any system's going to struggle, but it's our duty to make it as effective and as fair as we can, and I believe this is a good step towards doing this. So thank you all for your work on this. David.
Yeah, just to cap things off, really. I mean, any system will struggle because I think, across Wales, this is a problem elsewhere. I have sort of meetings with counterparts in other local authorities, and I'm frequently surprised by the numbers they've got on there. 3,000 in relative terms is high for Torfaen, or it's the highest I've known it to be, but it's higher elsewhere. This is a problem elsewhere. This is part of the problem, really. I do get the feeling that Welsh Government are giving house building the priority that it needs. I do get the feeling that they understand where we're at. So I do think we'll get there. How we get there is a more complicated question to answer, really, because in Torfaen we do have our own challenges. Unlike some other areas, we have challenges with land availability. So we're going to be slightly more reliant on repurposing existing buildings and being slightly more creative. So it's very challenging. But I mean, there are many different systems, as I should highlight, of home seeker policy up and down Wales, and none are perfect. And when you're faced with the mathematical situation of far too many people trying to move properties for too few properties, whatever system you have, it's always going to have problems. So quite frankly, the solution is to, where possible, to support social housing, socially rented housing, as much as possible. And I've got a good relationship with the architects, and I think we do as a council as well. And that is ultimately the key to resolving this crisis, really, because we're not going to do it without more homes, new homes. So yeah, that's the key. It's a good policy, I've got to say, but it's only as good as the situation that we're facing. So thanks to everybody who's put the hard work into this this policy, and yes, to pay tribute to Simon, who's put an awful lot of work into this, and to wish him well.
Thanks, David. Obviously, it's not strictly on the point of this report, but I'll use my chair's privilege or abuse it. I was very interested to see the modular housing in Cardiff that was delivered recently. Anything we can do to explore innovative ways. I know you mentioned that the land availability issues that we have, but my ears are always open to innovative ways to help work with our RSLs to try and solve that supply issue. I'm more than happy to have conversations about that, as you know. Right, any more questions, colleagues? If not, if we move to the recommendations of this report, which is Cabinet's requested to approve the revised home seeker allocations policy for implementation, and for this to be delivered from the 1st of April 2022, subject to the required system changes being implemented as above. So we're all happy to vote that one. That's unanimous, I believe. No votes against. So that concludes the final report of this morning's Cabinet meeting. Thank you, colleagues, for bearing with me, trying to do this hybrid meeting, trying to look at the two different screens and my reports at once. I look forward to being able to do this in person at some point in the future. But take care, everyone. Have a good rest of the week.